The auditorium pulsed with restless energy. The air thick with anticipation, impatience, and a kind of cruel curiosity that teenagers carried like armor. The ceiling lights buzzed faintly, throwing an almost sterile glare across the sea of faces packed into the rows of seats. Shoes tapped against the floor. Pens clicked. Whispers hissed like static from every corner. The banner stretched across the stage read, "Lincoln High School Annual Speech Contest. Speak your voice." And there she was, Emma Collins. She stood in the harsh spotlight at center stage, a lone figure against the polished wood backdrop. The microphone loomed before her like a judgmental eye, and her own reflection blinked back at her from the glossy black surface of the grand piano pushed to the side of the stage. Her knees trembled so violently she thought they might buckle. Her palms were clammy, slick against the thin metal stand. Her mouth was dry, her tongue heavy, her throat tightening like a noose. She could feel her pulse in every part of her body, her temples, her chest, her fingertips. She didn't have to look down to know that the front row was filled with smirking faces. Faces that had shadowed her life at Lincoln High. "She's gonna screw this up," a boy muttered just loud enough for laughter to ripple around him. Emma's ears flamed. Her vision tunneled. She wanted to run, to vanish, to trade places with anyone who wasn't trapped here in this cruel spotlight. Her voice caught in her throat. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. A suffocating silence spread, stretching, thickening. Seconds crawled like hours. Someone coughed. A girl giggled, then slapped her hand over her mouth too late to hide the sound. Emma's chest clenched. She could hear the blood roaring in her ears, drowning everything else out. This was it, the nightmare. The humiliation she had been bracing herself for. But beneath the roar of panic, another sound stirred, a softer, quieter echo. You've practiced every night. You know these words. They belong to you." She closed her eyes for just a second. In her mind, the auditorium melted away. She was back in her bedroom, standing barefoot in front of the mirror, whispering to her own reflection. She saw the crumpled note cards on her desk, the dim circle of light from her lamp, the determination that had kept her awake long after the rest of the house had gone quiet. When Emma opened her eyes, her gaze darted instinctively across the audience, and found her. Sarah Miller. Sarah sat near the aisle, leaning forward, her hands clasped tightly, her face lit with something no one else in that room carried: belief. Sarah nodded, just once, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. Emma inhaled. Her lungs expanded painfully, but it was air. It was something solid. She leaned closer to the microphone. Her voice came out thin at first, a fragile wisp of sound. "Good morning, everyone." The response was instantaneous. Snickers. A boy in the back mimicked her in a falsetto, earning himself a slap on the arm from his friend. Emma's cheeks burned. Her instincts screamed at her to stop, to run, but she gripped the microphone tighter. Her knuckles whitened. She steadied herself. And then, with a trembling exhale, she tried again. "My name is Emma Collins. And today, I want to tell you a story." The words floated out into the silence, shaky but clear. For a heartbeat, the laughter died down, replaced by mild curiosity. A few heads tilted. A teacher at the judges' table shifted, pen hovering. Emma's chest still heaved, but her voice didn't falter this time. "I know what you're thinking," she continued, her voice cracking slightly. "You're wondering why I'm here. Why someone like me, someone quiet, someone invisible, would dare to stand here in front of all of you." A murmur ran through the crowd, but no laughter. The hush that followed was different this time. It wasn't ridicule, it was waiting. Emma swallowed hard. She looked out across the faces, some skeptical, some bored, some expectant, and for the first time, she didn't flinch. "You're right," she said. "I am quiet. I've spent most of my life being overlooked, ignored, sometimes even mocked." Her eyes flicked, just briefly, to the cluster of girls in the third row who had perfected the art of cruel smirks. "Maybe you think that means I have nothing to say. But that's where you're wrong. I do have something to say. I always have." The microphone carried her words across the vast space, bouncing off the walls, reaching even the back row where the seniors slouched, arms crossed. Her heart still pounded. But it no longer felt like a cage. It felt like a drum. A rhythm. And then something remarkable happened. The laughter stopped. The whispers quieted. The restless fidgeting stilled. The auditorium, moments ago a storm of ridicule, was silent. Emma blinked. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected them to listen. But they were. She could feel it. The weight of their attention pressed in on her. No longer suffocating but electrifying. Emma inhaled again. Steadier this time. She let the words come. The words she had whispered night after night until they became her lifeline. Minutes began to blur. She didn't remember each line exactly as she'd practiced it. But she remembered the feeling. The conviction. She spoke of fear. How it had followed her like a shadow. She spoke of silence. How it wasn't the absence of words but the absence of courage to speak them. She spoke of how even the quietest voice deserved to be heard. Her voice, once barely more than a whisper, grew stronger with each sentence. The microphone no longer felt like an enemy. It was a vessel. Emma's eyes swept the room. Students leaned forward in their seats. The teachers scribbled furiously on their score sheets. Sarah's face glowed with pride. Her smile small but steady. Emma's knees still shook, but her voice did not. For the first time in her life, Emma Collins wasn't invisible. She was standing in the center of the world. And they were listening. She didn't notice when the whispers had stopped entirely. She didn't notice the absence of smirks. The way the same girls who had rolled their eyes now sat wide-eyed. Their lips parted. She only knew that she was speaking, and they were hearing her. The words left her lips with a power she hadn't known she carried. And deep inside, where fear had always reigned, something shifted. Something cracked open. Not courage. Not yet. But the beginning of it. The last words of her introduction echoed into the stillness. She lowered her gaze briefly, clutching the stand, letting the silence hang. For once, the silence wasn't her enemy. It was her ally. Then she lifted her eyes again. Her voice calmer, her breath steadier. And this, Emma said softly but firmly, is why I'm here. The auditorium was silent, waiting, expectant. Emma drew in another breath, ready to continue. That was the moment Emma Collins stopped being invisible. That was the moment her voice began to matter. A week before the speech contest, the Collins house sat in silence. The neighborhood outside was still, the street lamps buzzing faintly in the cool spring air. Inside, the living room television glowed with muted colors. Her parents half asleep on the couch after a long day. Upstairs, in the small bedroom at the end of the hall, Emma Collins was very much awake. The glow of a single desk lamp cast long shadows across her walls. Her laptop sat open, its blue-white light illuminating a document filled with paragraphs rewritten and highlighted a dozen times. Sheets of paper, crumpled and smoothed out again, littered the carpet around her feet. Emma stood in front of the mirror, barefoot, wearing an oversized hoodie that nearly swallowed her frame. She clutched a note card in one hand but didn't look at it. Instead, she stared at her own reflection, watching the way her lips moved as she whispered the words. My name is Emma Collins, and today, I want to tell you a story. The words trembled, even in the safety of her own room. Her voice caught on the edges of sentences, faltering before they could fully form. She stopped, sighed, and let her head fall back. The frustration slipped out in a groan. She crossed the room, snatched her phone off the desk, and pressed stop on the recording app. She replayed it. The sound of her own voice made her wince. It was too soft, too thin, like someone on the verge of vanishing. She buried her face in her hands. For a moment, the familiar shame washed over her, the same shame that came every time she tried to speak up in class. The same shame when her voice cracked in front of strangers. The same shame when kids in the hallway mimicked her for laughs. But this time, Emma didn't let it linger. She pushed back her chair, squared her shoulders, and whispered into the empty room. Again. She pressed record. My name is Emma Collins. The words came out firmer this time, though still shaky. She tried again, then again. Each time, the voice in her head screamed, too weak, too quiet, too broken. But Emma kept going. Hour after hour, long after the rest of the world had surrendered to sleep. She repeated the words. She adjusted her posture, Tried to breathe from her diaphragm. Tried to make her voice fill the space instead of curling into itself. Sometimes she succeeded. More often, she didn't, but she kept going anyway. Downstairs, her mother stirred on the couch. She thought she heard faint murmurs through the ceiling vent. She glanced at her husband. "Is Emma still awake?" she asked softly. Her husband yawned. "Probably. Studying. She's been up late all week." Her mother frowned. "I'm worried." He shrugged. "She's a teenager. Let her be. At least she's not out causing trouble." But her mother didn't look convinced. She made a mental note to check in with Emma tomorrow. Upstairs, Emma had lost track of time. The digital clock glowed 1:13 a.m. Its numbers accusing her. Her throat ached from repetition. Her eyes stung from staring at the same pages. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Still," she whispered one more time, as if the words themselves were a kind of prayer. "I am not invisible." The sound startled her. She hadn't meant to say it. It wasn't even part of her speech. But once it was out, it lingered in the air, stronger than anything else she'd spoken that night. She stared at her reflection. The girl in the mirror looked tired, fragile, but not broken. Emma closed her eyes, drew in a slow breath, and whispered, "I will not fail." The days that followed blurred into the same rhythm. School by day, practice by night. She carried her notecards in her backpack, pulling them out during lunch breaks while others gossiped around her. She practiced under her breath while walking home. She whispered lines to herself while brushing her teeth. The words became her constant companions, stitched into every hour of her life. But it wasn't easy. At school, the mockery didn't stop. On Wednesday, as she walked down the hallway clutching her books to her chest, she overheard two boys laughing. "Hey, Emma, practicing your big speech? Gonna blow us away with your whisper voice?" Their laughter rang out cruelly. Emma kept her eyes down and walked faster. Her face burned. The words she had practiced so hard crumbled in her throat. But later that night, when she stood in front of the mirror again, she repeated them anyway. Her voice cracked. Tears slipped down her cheeks. But she kept speaking, because if she stopped, they would be right, and Emma refused to let them be right. By Thursday night, exhaustion had carved deep shadows under her eyes. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her papers spread around her like fallen leaves. The speech was nearly memorized now. She could recite it in her sleep. But the voice, her voice, was still the enemy. She pressed record again. "My name is Emma Collins." She stopped, pressed play, and listened. For the first time, she didn't wince. It wasn't perfect, not even close. But it wasn't nothing. It was a start. Emma smiled faintly, a small flicker of pride warming her chest. She whispered into the quiet room, "They don't know me yet. But they will." Friday night came, the eve of the contest. Emma stood in front of the mirror one last time. The hoodie hung loose on her, her hair falling messily around her face. But her eyes looked different. Not fearless, not yet, but determined. She whispered the opening line again. "My name is Emma Collins. And today, I want to tell you a story." Her voice was steady. She let the silence hang. For once, the silence didn't feel like a threat. She looked at her reflection, meeting her own eyes, and whispered, "Tomorrow, I'll shine." And with that, Emma turned off the lamp, crawled into bed, and let the exhaustion pull her under. Behind closed doors, where no one saw, where no one mocked, Emma Collins had been building something fragile but unstoppable. Not just a speech, a voice. The Monday morning after Emma's final night of practice dawned gray and damp. Clouds pressed low over Lincoln High School, and the sidewalks shimmered with the residue of a night's rain. Students streamed into the building, huddled in groups, laughter and chatter bouncing off the lockers like ricocheting bullets. Emma walked among them, shoulders hunched, her books clutched tightly to her chest. The strap of her backpack dug into her shoulder, and she kept her gaze fixed on the floor tiles as if they might swallow her whole if she only stared hard enough. The contest was just days away. The thought buzzed relentlessly in the back of her mind. She could feel the weight of it pressing against her ribs, a countdown written across her bones. She tried to breathe evenly, to focus on her steps. But then the whispers started. "Look, it's Collins." A girl's voice floated from behind. Emma's stomach knotted. I heard she signed up for the speech contest. Another voice chimed in, followed by a burst of laughter. Can you imagine? She can't even order lunch without turning red. Emma's grip on her books tightened. Her face burned hot. As she turned the corner, she caught sight of a group of juniors leaning against the lockers. One of them cupped his hands around his mouth and called out in a stage whisper. Hey, Emma, give us a preview. Say something inspiring. The group erupted in laughter. Emma ducked her head and walked faster, her pulse racing. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to run into an empty classroom and lock the door. But she kept moving. Her steps echoed through the hallway until she reached her locker. She fumbled with the combination lock, hands trembling, praying no one would notice her there. A shadow fell across her. Don't listen to them, came a quiet voice. Emma looked up. Sarah Miller stood beside her, leaning casually against the next locker. Her strawberry blonde hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and her green eyes carried a steadiness that Emma envied. They're just idiots, Sarah added, lowering her voice. They don't know what you're capable of. Emma blinked, caught off guard. Words hovered on her tongue but refused to form. Sarah smiled faintly. I mean it. You've been practicing, haven't you? Emma's breath caught. For a moment, she wondered if Sarah could see through her, could somehow hear the whispered speeches in her bedroom at night. How? Emma started, then faltered. Sarah shrugged. I saw you in the library last week. Talking to yourself. She smirked. But it wasn't cruel. I figured it wasn't madness. Looked more like determination. Emma's cheeks flamed. She wanted to hide, to deny it. But something in Sarah's tone, the lack of mockery, the simple matter of factness, stopped her. Instead, Emma whispered, I'm trying. Sarah's smile widened. Good. Keep trying. And when you're up there, prove them wrong. The words sank into Emma like sunlight through a crack in storm clouds. For the first time that morning, she felt the tightness in her chest ease. The day dragged on, as days in high school often did. Emma sat in classrooms, taking notes, blending into the background as she always had. Teachers rarely called on her. Classmates rarely spoke to her. She was a ghost who occupied space but left no mark. But the whispers followed. At lunch, she overheard two girls at the next table. She's actually gonna do it. Stand on stage. It's gonna be hilarious. Totally. I'm bringing popcorn. Emma's stomach twisted. She pushed her tray away. Appetite gone. But then she remembered Sarah's words. Prove them wrong. The phrase repeated in her head like a mantra, steadying her trembling hands. That afternoon, Emma retreated to the library. It was one of the few places where she could breathe, where the noise of the world dimmed into the quiet rustle of pages and the soft hum of fluorescent lights. She tucked herself into a corner near the back, pulling her notecards from her bag. She whispered the lines under her breath, testing her voice, trying to push it just loud enough to carry but not enough to draw attention. My name is Emma Collins. Practicing again? Emma jumped. Her notecards slipped from her hands, scattering across the table. Sarah stood there, holding a stack of books. Grinning, Emma scrambled to gather her cards, muttering, I didn't mean. Relax, Sarah said, sliding into the chair across from her. I'm not here to make fun of you. I told you. I think it's brave. Emma froze, her hands hovering over the cards. Brave? Yeah, Sarah said simply. Most of us wouldn't dare get up there. Too scary. But you? You're doing it anyway. That's brave. Emma's throat tightened. No one had ever called her brave before. Shy, quiet, awkward, invisible. Yes, but brave? Her eyes stung unexpectedly. She blinked hard, willing the tears back. Sarah pretended not to notice. She leaned back, balancing her chair on two legs. So, want me to listen? Be your test audience? Emma's heart lurched. The idea of speaking aloud, even to just one person, felt terrifying. But Sarah's gaze was steady, kind, encouraging. Emma nodded. Barely. Sarah dropped her chair back onto all fours with a smile. Go ahead. Emma took a deep breath, her fingers tightening around her notecards. Her voice wavered at first, small and shaky, but as she spoke, Sarah didn't laugh. She didn't smirk. She didn't interrupt. She listened. And for Emma, that made all the difference. The bell eventually rang, shattering the quiet. Sarah gathered her books, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. Not bad, she said lightly, as if Emma hadn't just bared her soul. Told you. Prove them wrong. Emma watched her go, the words echoing in her chest. For the first time in years. Maybe ever. Emma didn't feel entirely alone. The rest of the week, the whispers in the hallways didn't stop. The mockery continued, sharp and cruel. But now, when Emma felt herself shrinking under the weight of it, she heard another voice cutting through the noise, Sarah's voice. Prove them wrong. And each night, when Emma stood in front of her mirror, repeating her lines until her throat ached, she whispered those words to herself. Not as a wish, but as a promise. The night before the speech contest arrived with a restless wind. Branches scraped against Emma's window, tapping like fingers that refused to let her sleep. The house was quiet, her parents already in bed, but Emma lay wide awake, her blanket pulled up to her chin, her heart refusing to settle. The clock on her nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m., each minute dragging like an eternity. She rolled onto her side, staring at the ceiling. Her mind raced with images she couldn't control, standing on the stage. Her voice breaking, the audience erupting into laughter. She could hear it already, sharp, cruel, relentless. She squeezed her eyes shut. Stop thinking about it. But the fear was louder than her thoughts. She sat up abruptly, her chest tight. She couldn't stay in bed. Not like this. Emma swung her legs over the side, her bare feet pressing against the cool wooden floor. She padded across the room to her desk, where her notecards sat stacked neatly. The lamp cast a weak circle of light as she flipped the cards over in her hands. The words she'd written so many times now etched into her memory. Her throat felt dry, her hands trembled. Still, she stood in front of the mirror. Notecards clutched against her chest. My name is Emma Collins. Her voice cracked. She stopped, biting down hard on her lip. Tears stung her eyes. She tried again. My name is Emma Collins. And today, I want to tell you a story. The words wobbled. Too fragile, too breakable. Emma dropped the cards onto her desk and gripped the edge of the mirror instead, leaning forward until her breath fogged the glass. You're going to fail, she whispered, her reflection glaring back at her. You're going to stand there and everyone will laugh. You'll prove them right. Her knees buckled. She sank onto the floor, hugging herself, fighting the sob building in her throat. The door creaked open. Emma? She gasped, quickly swiping at her face. Sarah leaned against the doorframe, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She wore pajama pants and a hoodie, her hair loose around her face. Sorry, Sarah said softly. Your mom let me in. I told her I was here to help with the contest. She hesitated. Guess I was right. Emma buried her face in her hands. I can't do it, Sarah. Her voice broke. I thought I could, but I can't. I'll freeze. I'll make a fool of myself. Sarah crossed the room, setting her bag on the floor. She knelt beside Emma, gently prying her hands away. Hey, look at me. Emma shook her head. Emma. Sarah's tone was steady, firm but kind. Look at me. Slowly, reluctantly, Emma lifted her gaze. Sarah smiled softly. You've practiced harder than anyone. I've seen it. You're ready. Emma's chest ached. What if I'm not? Then you'll stand up there anyway, Sarah said simply. And that's still braver than anyone else in that room. The words sank deep into Emma's bones. She wanted to believe them. She wanted to hold on to them like a shield. Sarah reached for the notecards on the desk and handed them over. Show me. One more time. Emma's hands shook as she took them. She stood slowly, facing the mirror again, Sarah behind her. Her reflection looked pale, exhausted, but her eyes carried something else, something flickering beneath the fear. She took a breath. My name is Emma Collins. And today, I want to tell you a story. Her voice wavered, but it carried. She continued, her words tumbling out, shaky but steadying, until she reached the end. When she finally lowered the cards, the silence in the room felt different, not heavy, not hostile, peaceful. Sarah clapped once, softly. Told you. You've got this. Emma turned, tears spilling down her cheeks. What if they still laugh? Then let them laugh, Sarah said, her voice firm. Because by the time you finish, they won't be laughing anymore. Emma swallowed hard. her throat tight. Sarah gave her a quick, fierce hug. "You're stronger than you think." When Sarah finally left, the room felt quieter, but not empty. Emma stood before the mirror one last time. Her reflection stared back at her, nervous, small, but holding a spark. She whispered into the stillness, "Tomorrow, I'll shine." And for the first time that night, she believed it. Emma crawled into bed, her body heavy with exhaustion. Her eyes fluttered shut. The storm of fear still lingered at the edges. But the words, Sarah's words, her own words, echoed louder. Not silence. Not mockery. Promise. The stage lights burned hot on Emma's skin. The microphone loomed before her, its metallic frame amplifying every shaky breath. The auditorium stretched out into a blur of faces, hundreds of eyes. Hundreds of judgments. Every one of them waiting. Watching. Some eager to see her fall. Emma's knees trembled, but she forced herself to stand tall. "My name is Emma Collins," she began, her voice trembling but audible. "And today, I want to tell you a story." The words floated into the room. Soft at first, vulnerable, like a bird taking its first uncertain flight. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. But Emma gripped the microphone tighter. She would not retreat. She drew in a shaky breath, then continued, "I've always been quiet. Too quiet. Some people think that means I don't have thoughts worth sharing. Or that I'm weak. Or invisible." She paused. The silence pressed in. She let it. But being quiet doesn't mean being empty. Her voice wavered, but it carried further this time, bouncing off the auditorium walls. A few students leaned forward, their expressions shifting. Emma's heart still hammered, but each sentence steadied her. She imagined herself back in her room, whispering these very words into the mirror, repeating them until they became part of her bones. "For years, I thought my silence was a weakness. That if I couldn't shout loud enough, I didn't matter." Her gaze swept the crowd, landing on the cluster of girls who had mocked her all year. "But I've learned something. Sometimes silence means you're listening. Sometimes silence means you're waiting. And sometimes silence means you're preparing for the moment you're finally ready to speak." The room shifted. The whispers quieted. The laughter stopped. Emma inhaled, her chest swelling with determination. "And this is my moment." The words hit harder than she expected. They echoed, landing in the hearts of those who had never heard her speak more than 2 words in a row. She told her story. She spoke about hiding in corners of classrooms, about being overlooked, about hearing her name only when it was the punchline of a joke. She spoke about walking through hallways where whispers followed her like shadows, about the sting of laughter that cut deeper than words. Her voice cracked, raw with truth, but she didn't stop. "People think being quiet is weakness," she said, her voice trembling but growing stronger. "But it takes strength to endure silence. It takes strength to stand in it, to grow in it, to hold on to your voice until the day you're brave enough to use it." The auditorium was still, the kind of stillness that buzzed with electricity. Emma looked toward the back row, where even the seniors who normally lounged with boredom sat upright, watching. She looked at the judges' table, where pens scribbled furiously. She looked at Sarah, her best friend, whose face shone with pride, her hands clasped tightly together. Emma swallowed hard, her throat aching, but she pressed on. "My whole life, I've been told I'm too small, too quiet, too invisible. And I believed it. I believed I had nothing to offer. But I was wrong." Her voice rose. "Because strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes strength whispers. And sometimes strength is standing here, even when your knees are shaking. Even when the whole world is waiting for you to fail, and saying, 'I am here. I matter. And you will hear me.'" The words rang out, echoing in the silence that followed. For a heartbeat, Emma thought she might collapse. The weight of the moment pressed down on her, threatening to crush her. Then it happened. Someone in the back clapped. The sound cracked through the silence like thunder. Another clap joined, then another. And then, all at once, the auditorium erupted. Applause filled the room. Thunderous, relentless. Students stood, hands pounding together, voices cheering. The same students who had laughed at her now shouted her name. The same girls who had mocked her now stared in stunned silence before slowly rising to their feet. Emma's chest heaved, her vision blurred with tears. She clutched the microphone, overwhelmed, every ounce of fear and doubt dissolving into something brighter, fiercer, unstoppable. She had reached them. She had broken through. For the first time in her life, Emma Collins wasn't invisible. She was undeniable. The applause thundered through the auditorium, rolling like a wave that refused to recede. Emma stood frozen in its center, her hands still gripping the microphone, her chest heaving, her vision blurred with tears she no longer tried to hold back. For a moment, she wondered if she was dreaming. But no, this was real. The sound filled her ears, her body, her bones. Hundreds of students on their feet, their hands pounding together, their voices cheering her name. The same auditorium that had once suffocated her with silence now lifted her higher than she had ever imagined. Emma's knees wobbled. She took a half step back, overwhelmed. The stage beneath her feet felt both solid and unreal, as if she were floating. Her eyes darted across the crowd. Faces blurred together, but she saw them. Students who had laughed at her in the hallway, now shouting her name. Girls who had whispered behind her back, now clapping until their palms turned red. Teachers who had never heard more than a few words from her, now staring with awe. And then, Sarah. Sarah was already standing, her smile radiant, her hands clapping furiously. Their eyes met across the distance, and Sarah mouthed two words. "You did it." Something inside Emma cracked wide open. Not in pain, but in release. Years of silence, of humiliation, of invisibility. All of it broke apart under the weight of this moment. The applause didn't stop. It grew louder, spreading like fire, unstoppable. Emma lifted a trembling hand to her face, wiping at the tears that streamed freely. She leaned toward the microphone one last time, her voice raw but steady. "Thank you." It was barely more than a whisper, but the microphone carried it. The cheers roared even louder. The contest ended, though Emma barely remembered stepping off the stage. She was swept into a blur of hands reaching to pat her back, voices shouting congratulations, faces turning toward her with something she had never seen before: respect. "Emma, that was amazing. I didn't know you could speak like that. You killed it." Emma blinked at them, too stunned to respond. Words failed her now, but for once, it didn't matter. She had already spoken the words that counted. At the edge of the stage, Sarah pushed through the crowd. Without hesitation, she threw her arms around Emma. Emma clung to her, her tears soaking Sarah's shoulder. "I told you," Sarah whispered fiercely, holding her tight. "You were braver than you thought." Emma pulled back, her face streaked with tears and laughter. "I was so scared." "I know." Sarah smiled through her own tears. "But you did it anyway. That's courage." Later, as the auditorium emptied and the chatter faded into the night, Emma found herself alone for a moment on the stage. She looked out at the rows of empty seats, the silence settling once more. But this silence was different. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't cruel. It was full. Full of possibility. Full of memory. Full of the echoes of applause that still rang in her chest. Emma stood taller than she ever had. She whispered to herself, her voice carrying in the stillness. "I was never weak. I just needed to believe." The words lingered, sinking into the walls, the floor, the very air of the auditorium. Emma smiled through her tears. For the first time in her life, she believed them. The next day at school, the whispers in the hallway returned. But they weren't the same whispers. "She was incredible last night. I didn't know she could do that." Emma Collins, who knew? Emma walked through the halls with her books pressed against her chest as always. But this time, her steps didn't falter. The whispers didn't cut. She lifted her head, her gaze steady. Some students smiled at her. Some nodded. A few even clapped her on the shoulder as she passed. And for once, Emma didn't feel like a ghost. She felt seen. That evening, Emma returned to her bedroom. The mirror still stood in its place, reflecting her small, familiar space. But the girl staring back wasn't the same. Her hair still fell messily around her face. Her hoodie still swallowed her frame. But her eyes were different. Stronger. Clearer. Emma stepped closer to the mirror. Meeting her own gaze, she whispered, "I am not invisible." And this time, she smiled, because she knew it was true. The applause from the night before lived on inside her. It wasn't just the sound of hands clapping. It was the sound of walls breaking, of chains snapping, of a voice rising that had been waiting for years to be heard. It was the sound of transformation. And it would never leave her.